Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am so happy to have Rachel Rock with me here tonight to discuss her recovery story. So a very warm welcome to the podcast today. It's so lovely to see you again.
Thank you, Jackie. It's great to be here from Boston, Massachusetts. Yes, it's a journey, right? Like much of life, this long COVID story, healing, recovery story is a long one.
For sure. It's quite an adventure, isn't it? So can you just say a little bit about yourself and maybe what life was like before you became unwell?
I got long COVID, May of 2022. Not a terrible case of it. I was sick, but whatever. Took those few days as many did. I had all my vaccines and felt like, okay, it was inevitable. I had kept myself from getting it for several years, but there it was. So I got better. Fever passed. Everything that seemed part of long COVID passed. And because I was in the midst of training for a bike ride here in Massachusetts called the Pan Mass Challenge, which is a 2-day bike ride that I had been doing by that point for some 12 years. It's in August, where you ride over 2 days, anywhere from 192 miles to 165 over 2 days. And so it's something I, have been doing for a long time. And so because I was in the midst of training in May, had just sort of started, I gave myself a break, waited a few weeks and decided I'd go out just for, a 10 mile or something short, easy, nothing. Thought I felt good. Did that and ended up back in bed for 2 days. Seemed kind of odd, but I thought, okay, tried it too early. Tried a few weeks, another 10 days went by, tried it again, and same thing happened. And a few more times. And even after dog walks and other, what to me was minimal exercise, I was flattened by it. And I knew, whoa, this is not how things usually go for me. And I remember early on speaking with a friend who's a cardiologist. This was, of course, the time still where we just didn't really have a handle on what was actually happening, but we had a name for it already, which was long COVID. And he, in his cardiology practice, had already started seeing people and trying to figure out kind of through the heart, by measuring the heart and running people through a variety of things, what he was seeing, as everybody was doing at the time, all from their different perspectives. And I remember him saying, I don't want to say it's long COVID, but you should just take it easy because I have a woman who runs marathons. She's had some similar experiences, and you could do more damage by pushing too hard. So you have to, that's a reframe, right? Not the, I'm an athlete, I can push through and I'll make this happen. So we know now, of course, that's what it was all about. That we were in just new territory. As the summer went on, so I am a journalist, and as I approach everything, I did a deep dive into every possible corner to try and figure out what was going on with me. Became a journalist on myself and found excellent information in some corners of YouTube. And Jez Medjugorje's, wouldn't ever miss any of his episodes. And so started to realize about this thing called dysautonomia. And I had actually even prior the word. I had gone looking. I realized that there were some things going on with my blood pressure. And my mother-in-law happened to have had a blood pressure cuff all the time, and we decided, let me just check it out and see. And sure enough, I had this thing where, you stand up, you lie down, you measure your blood pressure at these various points. And the drop in my blood pressure was very, very significant, and it wasn't coming back up. And so, no wonder I feel a little lightheaded, dizzy, etc. I also was noticing this shrinking from the world phenomenon. Um, I just can't have conversation. I can't go on walks and talk. I can't even talk very much in a given day. Um, and just how it was draining me. Now, I already, by this point in my life, there were several things that I brought into this. One, a realization that I am there are lots of names for it, but I am a closet introvert and extroverted introvert, a this or that, but that I already knew enough about myself that I realized at any time if I couldn't be very social, but if I put myself out there too long, I always needed to retreat. So I already understood how that was sort of, again, another sign that things were just off kilter for me. It was much more severe than it had ever been. The other piece about it is that I have had ADHD my whole life, because most people do, and I've been managing it with meds for 20 years probably. And I started to notice how my medications were making things worse, but I didn't yet understand what was actually going on. Went through that whole summer, tried to sort of do my own research. By the fall, went to see my primary care doctor here in Boston, where one I would have expected, of course, there'd be some good answers, but because there no one had figured much out. The good news for me was from the minute I leaned into the medical establishment, I was never questioned that something was off, something was going on. So I was very lucky that way, and that was enormously important, of course. Just that somebody believed that what I was experiencing was what I was experiencing. Um, I had a full battery of tests. I had every major organ checked, and that was brought me good news because they were all fine, but it left me, of course, with no real answers about what was going on with me. And as the fall went on, and I started to read more about, and I got a huge amount of information from David Petrino's lab at Mount Sinai. I got the protocol that he was developing. I went and tried to find a physical therapist here in Boston who understood the protocol, which was how you rehabilitate somebody. And it was being likened to people who had either traumatic brain injuries or stroke victims, that you have to bring people back physically in this very, very gradual, measured way. And something he said at the time really stuck with me, which was, all the scales we prior to long COVID, all the scales we were using to measure fatigue or exertion, that he was finding people with long COVID couldn't even enter at the bottom of those scales. We were so far below it. So that, again, was another sort of piece of information for me. Um, and at the time, too, I did a lot of acupuncture, which was something I had already been doing in my life for pain management. But of course, the acupuncturist had a way to help me with my blood pressure issue. And he, every week or twice a week, I'd do acupuncture, and he and I would measure again the dysautonomia. And so we could see. So I had some physical measure that's maybe something over, one thing was good for me and it was helping versus another that wasn't. The other thing that was so consequential for me in the early days was the app Welltory that I had on my watch, Apple Watch, and I was watching. I had already been tracking myself as sort of, the worried well type, like trying to figure out what my HRV was and was it what it should be and how did my sleep affect it? All the stuff that people spend a lot of time looking at. But what was great about it was I had it from the February before I got long COVID, and I could see, and it was as I was learning that there was metrics around my autonomic nervous system, um, that I could see in this app through HRV. I didn't quite yet understand how it all fit together, but again, I had some data for myself, of if I didn't feel well on a day, I could look and see, oh, you don't feel well, and your body knows it. and your body is registering it, even if you don't understand how it's registering it. And that sort of theme will run through my whole story because, as you talk about a lot on the podcast, there's a lot of this recovery journey, which is about letting go of knowledge and recovery vis-a-vis knowledge because we don't necessarily know the how and the why. But having said that, there's so much that if you learn to recognize the signs and you learn to read your body and you learn ways that for thousands and thousands of years, people, humans, mainly in Eastern cultures, outside of the Western culture, have used for thousands of years to understand what's going on in their bodies. And that was such a huge piece of the learning and the recovery for me.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. It's like learning your new body, isn't it? I remember someone saying that to me while I was still unwell, because everyone thinks, oh, well, I know what my body's like, I know how my body, and actually, in hindsight, I didn't, because my body had been screaming at me for years and I had just been, not even acknowledging it, let alone listening. But, then when you do become unwell, you do have to learn a new body or maybe more intimately learn what your body is telling you and start, as you say, to start to understand a bit about what is it telling me? What do these things mean? What does my body truly need in this moment? And how can I give it that? And that kind of is part of that recovery journey, isn't it?
100%. And it is. And that's the learning is we actually hold within our own selves and with, some learning and knowledge of people who have spent a lifetime understanding the human body from this other vantage point. We don't, not only do we hold the tools ourselves, but it is the tools are all around us, but it's what you just said. It's understanding when our body says, I need this, and knowing what this is. So recognizing the body is telling you just what you need, and then knowing how to find what you need and then how to give the body what it needs. And I mean, almost everyone I can think of in one way or another has done something in their lives already that speaks to this. And what I mean by that is, so in this first stage for me, I pretty quickly came to realize that everything in my story is about my autonomic nervous system. And for me, I've always really thought of this recovery journey is I'm just sitting on a stool. I've been building the legs of a stool. My stool that I am trying to stabilize for everything else is the autonomic nervous system. It starts and ends there. And it was so curious to me in the earliest days that I couldn't find anybody. There's no doctor of medicine, of allopathic Western medicine, who completely works on the healing of the autonomic nervous system. There are plenty of doctors, neurologists, others who work on helping you manage symptoms, mitigate symptoms. They recognize when there's dysfunction. But I kept thinking, but who can help me heal my autonomic nervous system? And that's then, of course, I crossed over, and that's where the next part of my story was really about learning about what are all the things that are making my autonomic nervous system, what's making it unsafe? Why is it not regulating itself? Why is it not bringing itself back into balance? And that partly goes to, as you just said, Jackie, my whole life, especially because I had ADHD, that was the sign. ADHD is essentially this, upregulation where, it just stays up there and you live your whole life up at the higher level of the cortisol scale. And until something happens, you're doing fine. I mean, you're moving quick, you're getting stuff done, you're energetic, you're, you get more done than anybody else and so on and so forth. But as you point out, like until you realize that there is a cost to that and it is going to come get you at some point. And for me and for many of us, it was long COVID that just tipped it, tipped the barrel over, put the little bit too much water in the barrel. The barrel was already way, way, way high with, almost at the edge, and then one drop and whoosh, it just sent the whole thing rolling. So ANS being my stool that I'm building, my recovery is building the stool. And the stool for me, as I look back on it now, had several legs. One is finding somebody who could help me balance my autonomic nervous system. And that's where Dr. Lydia Knutson comes in, who has been on the show. I'm lucky enough that Dr. Knutson is here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was connected to her through a very dear friend whose own sons had gone to her for years around all sorts of other things that the autonomic nervous system and chiropractic medicine and energy medicine can heal. But for me, chiropractic medicine meant cracking bones, meant manipulation. I just never even occurred to me that somebody who practiced that could help heal me. And as I won't really tell her story because it's all in the other episode, but she is one of the, I think, few healers right now of long COVID and started doing it in January of 2020. She didn't even know what it was that she was doing, but something was going on that she'd never seen before. She does really, practice-based medicine. In other words, she really learns from the patients who walk in. She has a very rigorous scientific approach, but she doesn't work on a bench and in the lab to figure this out. She works with her patients to heal them and has healed enormous numbers of people at this point. People are now coming from around the US. Her combination of her use of chiropractic medicine and energetic medicine and kinesiology is truly remarkable. But what she did for me was she had her long COVID protocol, which she talks about in the episode. Mine went beyond that because what I had also, which many of us who ended up with long COVID didn't know we had, but was carrying all of the viruses from my whole life that got reactivated. Epstein-Barr and herpes zoster, and I had Lyme's disease, and they were putting this stress on my system continually. And so I had actually several, I called them my fake recoveries, where I was finally believed I was better. I declared to my family at one point, long COVID is over on New Year's Eve of whatever year it was. And, everyone chirped in, long COVID dies tonight. And that was the big thing. And it became the, title of our text string. And everyone was so excited. And, I had regained my life. I had regained myself, my energy, everything, only for a few months later to crash again. And I just couldn't figure out why. What was I doing or not doing that kept causing this to happen? And that was when I first discovered there was something else in my story. So I had the autonomic nervous system is sort of the stool. I had this practitioner who also led me to somebody. I started doing a lot of functional medicine testing, discovered a bunch of allergies, and I turned out to be, of course, gluten intolerant. Many other things. I did a whole supplement regime and worked with a functional medicine doctor around some other testing. So that was sort of number two. Number three, then, of course, was diet. And I've since become keto, but now I'm not, and that helped for brain fog for sure. But the fourth leg of my stool, and I don't know that it is for everybody, but is trauma. And so the story for me was I was going along. I had thought I was better. I declared myself better, only to have something hit me again, not even knowing what it was that hit me again. So whether it was a virus or an illness or, oh, that trauma. My mother died when I was 15. From the outside world's perspective and my own had really triumphed. Phoenix out of the ashes. I was super resilient. I didn't mean I didn't cry. I cried plenty through the years. I wrote about it. I went to a therapist, but what I never did was process the trauma of the 15-year-old girl. And so And this was where Sally Riggs came in. When she talked about that as a piece for her, I realized, oh my, wow, that makes sense. Like, what if I look at all the reasons that my nervous system doesn't feel safe? That's the question I wake up and ask myself every day. If I sort of trip and fall again, I say, okay, what is making my nervous system not feel safe? Why? Right now, why am I back in that hole again? And it can be because I'm eating something poor that's not good for me at this point, or I actually have another virus, or there's something has triggered my trauma. So I started doing EMDR. The full name is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. And it's a process by which you work with a professional who's been trained in this, and you kind of go back and visit traumatic memories. And in so doing, you desensitize the brain and you reprocess the memory so that it isn't like it's happening over and over again, the kind of notion of PTSD. And there's lots to read about it and lots to learn about it. And it's been, for me, incredibly powerful. And what was incredible was, so I started EMDR. Then I had to take a break because I wanted to do the safe and sound protocol, which is, of course, how I met you, Jackie, um, and learned actually what it felt like to live in this body with this nervous system. And that class taught me the physical signs of upregulation, downregulation, upregulation, downregulation, and the latter. That was a game changer, is learning about how do I know that I'm crashed, and how do I know that I'm coming out, and the small signs. And that goes back to what we were talking about, is it's learning a language that you never knew you had to know before. Um, and so the safe and sound protocol, really, I had to stop the EMDR because you actually can't do EMDR while you're doing safe and sound. So I paused, I did the safe and sound protocol. And that was when I realized that the EMDR, I had done enough of it, did the class with you, and then came back to it. And what was stunning to me was when I would get near one of those traumatic memories. I mean, I can even feel my body now. The way I feel it in my body, and when you're doing EMDR, you're being asked, where do you feel it? Like, and has it moved? And then, and the eye movement, you're following someone's finger back and forth, or you're tapping. It's bilateral stimulation that's kind of uh, shifting the traumatic memory. But I couldn't believe how exact the feeling was in my body between when I was reliving a trauma or experiencing trauma and chronic fatigue of long COVID. They were the identical body feelings. And that was where I was like, oh my gosh, of course. I mean, yes, I already knew my ANS, recorded it all. Only thing that mattered every day was to make sure my autonomic nervous system had what it needed. And when I made the reference earlier about how most of us in one moment or another are doing things to care for our ANS because we just know that it is good for us. In other words, yoga, breathing, meditation, exercise, walking, holding your dog, holding your cat that you taught me, all of that. We're actually all programmed as humans to be doing this because it feels good. So it's not even like there's some complicated language to learn. You're doing it all the time. It's just some of us got to a place and have gotten to a place and are still in a place where we cannot afford not to keep our eye on our nervous system all the time and really care for it. Um, and so the EMDR has been a big piece of it. That was really, I did the safe and sound protocol. That was really like classroom learning almost of the autonomic nervous system. And the EMDR for me has been then really combating one of the major assaults to my nervous system, as has work on my diet and learning that I just discovered I have a allergy to dairy, which I never knew. Um, and other things that, I have to still take care of myself, but they're things that I can avoid doing because knowing that they will tip my autonomic nervous system into a zone that is not good for me. I stopped working all this time. I mean, I would do a little bit of writing here and there, but because I'm a freelance journalist, um, you know, nobody was coming after me. It was just I wasn't pitching, I wasn't. And the hardest part of the healing journey was the loss of self, the loss of the person I knew. I just didn't recognize myself. And I think that is the most painful part of all of this for any one of us is just knowing that this is not who I am. And Ed Young wrote an article, a story about chronic fatigue in the Atlantic. And there was a line in that that I found incredibly helpful and powerful, which was depression is when you're sitting on the side of your life and you really don't care about getting back in or not. Chronic fatigue is sitting on the side of your life, desperate to get back to what you love to do and just unable. And that was really helpful because I could at least keep telling myself, and surely there was elements of depression in this because we don't know who we are, right? And we can't be who we want to be. And of course, that goes to community and the incredible community that you've built through the Long COVID podcast, through the breathing groups. It's we all know, right? The silence is what paralyzes us, not being able to share, not being able to see that there are others going through the same thing. And that's in this kind of weird way, that is the beautiful outcome of long COVID, in that we are so connected that we would do these classes and you'd be in Scotland and I was here in Boston and we would have, one person in Germany and one out in Seattle and somebody else in England. And here we were all just trying to heal together. And so, there are things about long COVID that have strengthened us and our connections to each other. But of course, I can now also say that because I'm healed. So
we'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. And you know what I love about chatting with people who have recovered is that everyone's story is different. And there are often, if not always, a lot of commonalities and similar themes. But everyone's route is different, and the puzzle pieces that you have put together in your own journey, and what a journey, they are unique to you. So you found all these things that helped you. How did you know that you were fully recovered, and what did that look like for you?
So the way I knew I was healed was, I was getting better and better. There were sort of several things that I held out to myself. One was being able to ride the Pan Mass Challenge again. That was big. So I wanted to see if I could do that. I was able to do one day, so 86 miles last summer, August. But I'll never forget. And the way I did it, actually, so there are parts of the ride where you have to go up hills. Not a ton in the days that I was doing, but anyway, there's hills. And of course, your instinct, and this is a metaphor for what you were saying about how we live our lives, certain types of people, but the hill comes, you gear up, you give it everything you have, you go as hard as you can barely breathe at the top. And I had learned, though, that if I was going to do this, that was the last thing I could do. I had to fight as hard as I could against that instinct to get up the hill. Instead, I had to go the opposite direction. I had to downregulate. I had to close my eyes. I had to breathe in 4, breathe out 6. Breathe in 4, breathe out 6. Everybody else would be flying by me. That's fine. But I'm going to get to the top of the hill. And I feel like that is really what allowed me to do it and also got me through to being healed. I managed it. At the end, I'm in the last mile riding with my husband, and I turned and I said, "So, do you think this means I'm recovered from long COVID because I did this?" And we both were like, "I don't know." I mean, that's the big question. When you have a chronic illness, what says you're over? What says you still are in that same body? You're still having all the same vulnerabilities that you always had, but was I better? And so I sort of was decided I didn't need to have an answer to that. I had written something that I set out to do. I knew that I was better enough to do that ride, and that was very powerful for me. Then 10 days later, I got COVID again, and I got over COVID. But I got over it in two or 3 days. I did it on my own. I didn't take Paxlovid, and I recovered. And 10 days later, I was actually okay. And so that for me was sort of okay, I got COVID again, and I got better. And now, granted, there was a lot in the background that let that happen. Again, Dr. Knutson had been doing so much work on my system and helping me clear these viruses and all the other stressors that were working on my system. I knew much more now about how to care for myself. Um, and the last piece though is I still hadn't started taking my medicine, my ADHD medicine, because if I was going to go back to work, which is what I, of course, wanted to do, knowing that to work well, to work effectively engenders stress. Stress is my enemy, or too much stress is my enemy, or unregulated stress is my enemy. So because the upregulated mind is what I have to be very careful of, could I take medicine that does that or helps regulate the nervous system and still work? And that was sort of for me the last piece, and which I worked with a psychologist, she's a psychopharmacologist, and who really understood actually chronic illness. What I'm really been blown away by is how many people out there, when you go looking for caretakers and healers and people who have their piece of knowledge in this story, how many of them really met me right where I needed them to and said, okay, first of all, long COVID, I get it. Whether they had it or not, they never questioned its existence. They understood what it was in this larger framework of post-viral illnesses, which I think that, again, when we talk, you and I, before we started, we're talking about how everyone is still trying to solve for their piece. But I do think there is a really amazing effort to pull a lens much further back on this and say, wait a sec. This is one of many post-viral illnesses that have existed over time. There's, ME/CFS, long Lyme, long COVID. This is a chronic disease state that we have seen for thousands of years. We might not have had the names, we might not have had all the tools, the understanding, but this is the body reacting to its environment, and there are ways to help the body heal itself. And it's, as you know, it's a fundamental shift in how we think of it all. And so I sort of try and say to people who ask, it's partly I give others credit for this, and partly I take credit for it myself, because I think that's we are an agent of our own healing. That's the whole point here. We're a biological system. So think about when a tree falls and in the forest, and the process by which the tree doesn't stand itself back up, right? The tree falls, but then the tree adapts to its environment. And I always go back to Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin spoke, often people say Charles Darwin is survival of the fittest. That's who survives. But the truth is the creatures who survive, and we are mammals, of course, are the ones who are most adaptable to their environment. And so this whole journey has been about adapting to my environment, changing my environment a bit, or adapting to what the needs are. And, knowing that I'm going to have good days and bad days. And you were so helpful with that in those early stages of recovery, when I would email you and I'd say, Jackie, how do you know if you're recovered? And, you would say, well, you're doing more than you could. It doesn't mean every day is in the forward direction, but it's a process. And part of it is a mindset. So I thank you for that.
Well, it's a pleasure to have had a small part in it. But I think, what you said a moment ago, that you did some of it yourself. I think, you did all of it yourself. And, I think, you may have met with people or worked with people who steered you in the right direction. But ultimately, it's you that searched them out. It's you that put in that work and that showed up. we were talking a moment ago before we hit record about the episode that I did quite recently about the recovery themes. And for me, I think, number one was that consistency. It's finding something that helps and then doing it consistently, not just doing it once and saying, no, that's too much work, or, it didn't fix me. It's showing up and continually doing it over and over and over and seeing those little wins become bigger wins. So, I think I remember speaking to my partner, and I can't remember, it was one of those questions that just came up in my head. And I said, what's the thing that you're most proud of in your life? And he was like, uh, I don't know. And he gave me some answer. And then he turned the question round on me and he said, what's the thing that you're the most proud of? And I thought, I don't know, actually. That's quite a hard question to answer. And I was thinking, I've achieved quite a lot in my life, but what's the thing that I'm most proud of? And I think I said to him, well, when I recover from long COVID, it's going to be that. Um, and it was this kind of, it is such a difficult journey. It's a very difficult journey in terms of physicalness because it's so freaking uncomfortable. It's absolute hell to go through physically, but mentally it is such a tough journey as well because you kind of do have to do it yourself, even if you have guidance from other people and you're lucky to have support and community with people that are helpful. You are still the one that has to wake up every day in that body and continue to keep doing the things, even when you don't feel like you're going in the right direction, over and over and over. So it's like, yes, recovery. I mean, that's the goal, and that's a huge achievement. But even for anyone listening who is going, yeah, but I'm not recovered. Yeah, but if you are showing up consistently and you are finding improvement, even if it's 0.5%, that is still such a huge win. And like, keep doing it, keep showing up and keep doing it, isn't it? I think that's so important.
Totally. It really is. And I just want to James Nestor's piece because
Mm.
that was for me. So again, there's certain books that have been passed around the long COVID community, right? Breath was certainly when I was doing the Safe and Sound protocol that, that book really changed my way of looking at the world. But in this book, it's in the end of the book. It's in the epilogue, this chapter called A Last Gasp. And he's sitting next to a woman. He's now traveling around the US or the world for his book, Breath. And he's on the airplane, and a woman asks him, my sister has cancer. What can you tell me some stuff I can share with her to help her cure? And he talks about the fact that modern medicine still has its limitations. It's what it's what we have to actually fully acknowledge, right? And I'll just read from it. He said, dozens of doctors at Harvard, Stanford, and other institutions told me the same thing. Modern medicine, they said, was amazingly efficient at cutting out and stitching up parts of the body in emergencies, but sadly deficient at treating milder, chronic, systemic maladies, the asthma, headaches, stress, and autoimmune issues that most of the modern population contends with. And goes on, it says, like all Eastern medicines, breathing techniques are best suited to serve as preventative maintenance, a way to retain balance in the body so that milder problems don't blossom into more serious health issues. Should we lose that balance from time to time? Breathing can often bring it back. He said, but to me, if there's one thing that, again, that has changed my way of thinking of my health and myself, is my everyday job is to combat the chronic illnesses that inevitably are coming at me or are within me. And to the extent that we can, whether it's through breathing techniques, whether it's through yoga, meditation, EMDR, all the different modalities that actually speak directly to the autonomic nervous system in a way that modern medicine and Western medicine can't and doesn't, that is our job every day, is to do what we can to protect that part of ourselves. And I give my long COVID journey all credit for that learning, and it'll serve me well for however many, hopefully, decades I have yet to walk the earth.
Yeah, and I think, that's such a great point. We learn these techniques out of necessity. We get long COVID or we get MECFS or whatever it is, and your world falls apart literally overnight, practically, possibly. And we are desperately, desperately searching, and we find these tools, these strategies, these techniques, maybe people, practitioners, out of desperation. But these are tools that we have for life. And, it's like we learn them out of necessity in order to get well. But then once we have regained our health, it's about maintaining our health. How can I stay this way? Because, I mean, you've mentioned ADHD. My brain is a very busy brain. I have that, constant, it's like the monkey with the symbols, fireworks all the time. And, it's a superpower. My brain is amazing, but my goodness, does it trip me up sometimes? And, it's kind of knowing, okay, how can I use it in the right way, but also to turn it off? I know the sort of things that are going to trip me up. I know the sort of characteristics that might be the ones that are going to, pull me in the wrong direction. And I understand them now. So it comes back to this awareness, doesn't it? It's a breath awareness, awareness of your body, awareness of your nervous system, as you were saying, tracking your nervous system and understanding what state are you currently in. So we can then be the best version of ourselves, if that doesn't sound too cheesy. Maintain that health.
And have you done that? Have you done that, Jackie? Have you on your, because you teaching me that um looking for the signs, right? Yawns and breaths and things that you are shifting yourself. That is something that
Yeah.
I probably use every day. For me, my clear signal to myself that I am upregulated or in crash mode is when I can't
Yeah.
get a full breath. That is when I know that something is awry. Like I
Yeah.
just go and I can't get the full breath. And it happens when I'm doing EMDR all the time because I know that that is what's happening.
It's that stress response, isn't it? It's that trauma
Those
response.
tiny little things that if you just knew to ask yourself or recognize, it's a game changer. It gives you a power to care for yourself in a way that nothing else can.
When it comes back to strategy number, I think it's number three, understanding, doesn't it? Understanding what is going on in your body, what is triggering you, what are your stressors, where are you in your nervous system, and therefore leading on to strategy number four, building your toolkit. And I think it's something that everybody, whether they're someone with long COVID, MECFS, or someone who is quote unquote completely healthy, everybody should understand about their nervous system because, again, it's that maintaining health. If you're lucky enough to have not experienced something like long COVID, you want to maintain your health so you don't become unwell. And I think, we're looking at this from having been through this horrendous experience, and as you said, you've learned a lot. I look at it the same. It's one of the silver linings of this experience is that I have learned a lot. It was a very hard lesson, but I have learned a lot, and life is so much better as a result. I just wish I hadn't have had to go through it just in order to get there. Um, but kind of coming back to what you were saying, um it is that kind of, if everybody understood the power of health better, I think we would treat it with more respect. And I think maybe that's what it is. It's valuing health above really anything else because it is the most precious thing that we have. And you and I know what it feels like to have kind of lost that. And for me, it makes me all the more grateful to have regained it and to, treat my body with more respect, I suppose. And that's not blame for anyone who's unwell. It's maybe the benefit of hindsight or lessons learned or just understanding cause and effect, maybe. I don't know, but I think it was a definitely a lot of lessons. And I value it a lot more now.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's life happens while making other plans, said John Lennon, I think. Um, and it wasn't part of my plan, but you need to we have to again, we have to be adaptable and
Yeah.
and figure out how to react to what's being given to us, thrown at us, and looking for the tools and being open and understanding how what the connections are and as you guys have also said a lot in the breathing techniques and everything, it's also just not exposing yourself to people or things that don't make you happy or don't make you fulfilled or don't, there's things in the world. I mean, and it's the everyday right now, right? Everything is being turned on its head. And so do you not pay attention? Well, that's a hard thing to do. It's incredibly stressful, but do you learn how to pay attention? Yes, you get better and better. So, there's a lot of people out there who are still suffering, which that's the hardest part of the conversation is, we've figured it out through all sorts of somewhat luck and somewhat effort. But the people who are still out there. So thank you for doing this podcast still.
No, thank you. And thank you for sharing your story because, as you say, there are so many people who are still on that journey. And it is so important to share that hope and to share some ideas. And I'm sure there are things that you've said today that will resonate with people. People will be having their light bulb moments and going, oh, okay, that resonated. Or I'm going to go try that, or I'm going to think about that in a slightly different way, which maybe allows me to access something different. So I think, it is so important. And, as you said, life happens. And what our job is, I think, and what is important is that we are able to weather that storm. The resilient, regulated nervous system is not a nervous system that is totally happy all the time. It's one that is able to deal with those stressors when they happen because they do. We can't avoid them. So thank you so much for coming along, sharing your story. It's been such a delight to chat with you, and I'm so pleased that life is good. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch